Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Paul Harrison. On behalf of the Ho Center for Buddhist Studies at Stanford, it is my pleasure to welcome you here this evening. I would also like to extend a special welcome to our friends from the Shin-Yuen Foundation and the Shin-Yuen Temple, and to express once again our appreciation for their support. Through the generosity and vision of the Shin-Yuen Foundation, the study and teaching of Buddhism at Stanford has been greatly enhanced by the Shin-Yuen Visiting Professorship, which each year enables us to bring to our university a prominent scholar of Buddhism to offer courses and engage with our students and our faculty in various other ways, one of which is to present a public lecture drawing upon their own research. Tonight then, it is my great pleasure to introduce our current Shin-Yuen Visiting Professor, the 9th in the series and the first to come to us from Europe, Professor Jens-Uwe Hartmann from Munich. Professor Hartmann is actually a graduate of Munich's Ludwig-Maximilians-Universität, where he now works, having done his bachelor's, master's and PhD degrees there in the fields of Indology, Indian art, Tibetology, Sinology and Ethnology. Yes, that is a lot of ologies. Professor Hartmann completed his second PhD, his Habilitation, at the University of Göttingen, where he began his teaching career in 1984. Some 10 years later, he was called to the chair of Tibetology at Humboldt University in Berlin, a post he held for 4 years before taking up his present position as Professor of Indian and Iranian Studies at Munich University. He has also held visiting positions at the Collège de France in Paris, at the two premier institutes for advanced Buddhist studies in Tokyo, and at UC Berkeley, where he was the Numata visiting professor in 2010. But this did not stop us from inviting him here. Now, after almost 3 months at Stanford, he can at last say that he has had the full Bay Area experience, having seen both sides and collected ample material for ethnological reflection, enhancing his t-shirt and hoodie collection, and testing his capacity for tact and diplomacy when asked which place he prefers, whose graduate students are better, and so on. A line of inquiry, feel free to continue it during the question and answer session. Professor Hartmann is indeed a man of many talents and broad interests, but the principal focus of his work has always been the study of Buddhist literature, from the discourses of the Buddha himself to the poetry and commentary of his followers in later centuries, on which he has published 18 sole author monographs or co-edited books and about 90 articles. I would like to make particular mention, however, of the leading role he has played in several international projects dedicated to advancing the study of recently discovered Buddhist manuscripts, notably those relating to the Buddhist manuscripts in the Skøyen collection, based in Oslo, and the Sanskrit manuscript of the Dirghagama, the long discourses of the Buddha, for which Munich is the headquarters. In these projects, Professor Hartmann has not just been a figurehead, but one of the heavy lifters, I might say, a heavy lifter with a very sharp eye for detail. As well as being impressively proficient, however, in the minutiae of the study of Buddhist manuscripts and texts, Professor Hartmann does not lose sight of the broader context, the living world of Buddhism in which those manuscripts and texts were produced and circulated and used. And his topic tonight, Monks and Merchants, How to Spread Buddhism, speaks to this side of the picture. Please join me in welcoming Professor Jens-Uwe Hartmann.
Thank you very much, Paul. Let me add some more words of gratitude in various directions. Different from the situation here in the States, in Germany, we have a fixed retirement age. And this means that my very last sabbatical is coming to an end. I enjoyed an extremely fruitful, but also extremely pleasant time here in Stanford. And I'm extremely grateful to all those who have made this possible, first and foremost to my host, Paul Harrison, then to his wife, Irene, and their staff, their team, who did everything to make me feel at home. And second, my thanks to the Shin Yuen Foundation, who made it possible by creating this visiting professorship that I could come here. And third, last but by no means least, a word of thanks to my students and my colleagues sitting here in the room who made sure that I never felt alone and that I had a lot of fun. And actually, fun is also an important part in academia. So should not underestimate that, and you did everything to make me feel at home. If there was anything I would slightly criticize, it might be the weather. That was quite different from what people at home expected me to experience in California, and I expected this as well, I must say. But even that was, I've said that many times, I've never seen California so green, and I've been here quite often by now. It's a beautiful sight, and so I do not complain. Now, today I want to speak about sponsorship and about the spread of Buddhism and about how these two are connected, or maybe even inseparably intertwined. Sometimes we tend to think that such a wonderful religion like Buddhism spread effortlessly, as it were, because it was so sublime, so pure, so convincing. And this view is reinforced by our knowledge of the Buddha's attitude towards money and possessions. The Buddha and his monks lived without property. They were not allowed to touch money if we want to believe the normative texts. And so an ideal picture unfolds in a way of people aloof from everyday life and from our very mundane concerns. Of course, this picture could not be more deceptive. A new religious movement needs to engage with the world, and it needs to do this in manifold ways if it wants to survive. And this, I think, is especially true of the situation in ancient India. For all we know, the time of the Buddha must have been an extremely fertile period. Fertile in the sense that it was characterized by a plurality of different religious movements. And most of these movements seem to have followed a set of certain ascetic rules, among them the rule of giving up all worldly possessions and of not working for their own living. In other words, and this is the important point, all these movements were fully dependent on others for their sustenance and their survival. Now, if such a movement does not only wish to survive, but to grow and flourish, it will need to offer something to the world that other rival movements do not offer, or do not offer to the same degree or in the same quality. And this offer must have to do with the basic concerns of those people. And usually these concerns are not, have little to do with exalted philosophical views or some very difficult path to salvation, to a faraway salvation, a path very difficult to follow. Usually these are much more immediate concerns. I'm talking about the beginning of Buddhism, and this is a period, a historical phenomenon, it's a historical phenomenon in a period about 2,500 years ago, just roughly, at a time when reliable historical knowledge is very limited, one could even say nearly non-existent in India. In such a case, it's always useful to look at present day's developments. What is this? Buddha Amitabha sitting on top of a city highway tunnel in the middle of an, as you may easily see, of an Italian city. Some of you have been in that city, I'm quite sure, and one of you may even recognize it. Well, probably does not. No, this is not a very, this is not what you usually see in pictures of that city. It's Florence, and this image gives me a very nice opportunity to make 2 points at the same time. First, this is an attempt, this is an indication of an attempt at spreading Buddhism and Buddhist culture to Italy. And second, this is a copy of a statue created by Shinjo Ito, the founder of Shin-Yuen. The statue was installed there in order to draw attention to an exhibition called The Vision and Art of Shinjo Ito in Italy in the year 2008. And this, I was invited to that exhibition, and that was actually my first encounter with Shin-Yuen. For spreading Buddhism, you need more than just goodwill. One needs material support. In brief, one needs money. This is true today, and this has been true in the past. Shinjo Ito hadn't been a merchant. This would have been too good for my talk. Regrettably, it was not. But after various employments, as you know, he finally became an artist. And he founded a powerful organization. An organization that is able to support a variety of things that have to do with spreading or supporting Buddhism in the field of art, academia, and various other fields. Now, going back 2,500 years, who fulfilled this function in India during the time immediately after the Buddha and during the first centuries? It appears that merchants played an important role, and in my eyes, they probably played the most important role, more than rulers or farmers or other social groups. Now, most of what I'm going to say in the following has been said before. And this should make it quite easy to follow, actually. But as far as I can say, as I can tell, it has been told in different places. What I will do now is try to combine existing information and to arrange it in a way that it results, hopefully, in a new perspective, in a new perspective, or that the previous known information receives another coherence. I will look at merchants, see how they are employed in Buddhism, ask the question whether they are just another group of people surrounding the Buddha, like kings, Brahmins, courtesans, and who else, and see if there's a possibility, if there is possibly more to them once we connect the available information. This, I warn you, is a huge topic. I will not go in every detail, quite the opposite. All I will be able to do in this talk is present a few exemplary informations, examples, and connect them. What does the Buddhist tradition tell us about the Buddha and his relation to merchants and money? Some of you will have seen this image in the advertisement for today's talk and perhaps wondered about its meaning and about the connection. I don't think that this object is very well known. What do we see here? This is not wood, as one might imagine in the first moment. This is stone. It's a stone pillar of a stupa, a very famous stupa in ancient India, stupa of Barhut, and that means it goes back to the 2nd or 1st century before the Christian era. This is before the Common Era. It's, in other words, it's quite early. To give you an idea what it means to have a railing, it's from the railing of a stupa, and to give you an idea what it means to have a railing around a stupa, I show you another better preserved example. Barhut is not so perfectly well preserved. I think most famous example is obviously the main stupa in Sanchi, another place in northern central India. In the middle you see the huge stupa itself, the tumulus shape, and around it you see a stone railing. Quite often there's a stone railing. If there's a stone railing, it may be carved, and if it is carved, it may contain scenes or will contain scenes from the life of the Buddha or from earlier lives and other figures important in Buddhism. I will show you an example. Before we return to the pillar of Barhut, we should take a look at just a brief look at the map to locate the two. And this is, here we have Barhut, and is this Sanchi? This should be Sanchi. I don't see it so well from this perspective. Okay, so in the central middle northern India. Now back to Barhut. If we, the medallion shows a well-known scene of the life, in the life of the Buddha. Of course, you won't find the Buddha himself. We are still in the so-called uniconic period of Buddhist art, where the Buddha is never represented in human form. But a look at the inscription proves that we are, what we are dealing with, that the identification of the image is correct. This is Middle Indic, of course, and not every word is completely clear. Jetavana anatapediko, dete, kote santadena, keta, translated, the meaning is crystal clear. Translated, Anathapindada donates the Jetavana after having bought it for a covering with 10 millions. And the story goes as follows. The Jetavana is the grove, the park of a prince called Jeta at the outskirts of the town of Shravasti. And Anathapindada was an extremely rich merchant and at the same time a devoted follower of the Buddha. He bought the grove and presented it to the Buddha, and therefore many sutras, many discourses were delivered in the Jetavana as an important place in the biography of the Buddha. Prince Jeta, however, the previous owner, he was very reluctant, not at all eager to sell his grove, and therefore he claimed a totally exaggerated sum of money. He demanded the whole ground of the Jetavana to be covered with coins and thought that Anathapindada would refuse, but no, Anathapindada said, okay, I'll do that, and this is exactly what we see here. The figure in the middle holding this flask, this is Anathapindada, who confirms the donation by pouring water from a golden pot into the hand of the Buddha, an Indian ritual act in order to verify such a donation. The figure in the front may again be Anathapindada. In old Indian images, it's not at all unusual to show one and the same person twice or even 3 times, especially if a story with several different situations has to be shown in one image, has to be condensed into one image. So, oops. That's okay. Anathapindada is standing beside an ox cart. The oxen are unhitched, and he is supervising workers. Workers are taking trays with money from the cart and go here. This one has it on its back, and they lay the coins out on the ground of the Jetavana. This is the first scene, the acquisition. The second scene is the presentation, the donation, and it's very likely that we have to imagine the Buddha here on this seat under the tree. This would be exactly the place where the Buddha would be expected during this ritual act when Anathapindada is pouring the water. The people here on the left side is not clear. There may be spectators or visitors. This is not clear what this really means. To show you, give you a look at the coins. Here they are highlighted. Some of them are highlighted, and if we compare them with the real coins of that age, the so-called kahapanas, they're quite, usually they are square, not at all following the Greek style of coinage, but these are the coins in use during the first centuries before the Common Era. And it makes a lot of sense if they are square to spread aground. This is the image and the story, and it is surely not by chance that this scene was displayed on the railing around an important stupa, around an important monument where people would come and see it. Anathapindada is quite clearly the Buddhist role model of a nabob, of an extremely wealthy person and of a rich merchant. And no doubt the image invited emulation. If we take the message of the story seriously, the Buddha saw no problem in associating with the rich. He saw no problem in accepting lavish gifts, and merchants apparently were an interesting target group for the new movement. Was Anathapindada the only merchant connected with the Buddha? Of course not. This would not give a good talk if he was the only one. There have been others, and this leads us quite a couple of years back to an interesting period in the much earlier in the biography of the Buddha, and it brings us to Bodh Gaya, the place of awakening. I summarize the story, and just in a few words, the Buddha is sitting under the Bodhi tree and enjoys the happiness, the blissful state of awakening. But nobody is offering food to him. As it happens, two merchants are about to pass by. Their names are Trapusa or Tripisa and Balika, and they are clearly on a business trip since they come along with 500 carts, 500 chariots, and their employees evidently a trading caravan. I used the opportunity to show you another pillar of a stupa, regrettably rather damaged, and this time from Sanchi, and the decisive scene is this one here on that side. And this will be, this just to give you an idea where it is placed on the pillar. It will become clearer in the next picture where the lines are drawn. And apparently merchants, and I show you, put another picture, a drawing of the same scene taken from a recent book of Osmund Boparachi, just appeared, to show you what's really going on there. Evidently, it's one of the carts, the merchants sitting in that cart, and they are on their way. To continue the story, a god notices that the merchants will pass by the place where the Buddha is sitting. And because he's a former relative of them, now reborn as a god, he wants to benefit them. And therefore he approaches them in the middle of the night and illuminates their camp with his divine light, and talks to them and suggests that they should offer food to the recently awakened Buddha, who had nothing to eat for the last 7 days. Such an offering, he says, will secure profit and happiness for them. And Tipusa and Balika, the two main merchants, they do not recognize the god. They do not notice, they do not know that this is a former relative of them, but they think if such a god comes to us and tells us about this person, about this Buddha, the Buddha must be a very important personality, so we have to go there. And they take food, go to the Buddha and request him to accept their offering. But this brings the Buddha into a pickle. And he reflects that it would be improper to take the food, this offering, with his bare hands. So what to do? With his bare hands, and the text says, like the Tirthikas do, like the non-Buddhists do. And he considers how previous Buddhas have handled the situation and found a solution. And for me, this is an extremely interesting passage because it connects in a very clever way, as you will see in a moment, with a group of non-human beings, a group that is especially important for merchants. The Buddha realizes that his predecessors, and you may know that the biography of the Buddha repeats itself in a way. So it's a model that is lived through by every Buddha. So it makes sense to think, what did my predecessors do? And he realizes that they used a bowl for this purpose. And so he thinks that such a bowl would be a useful thing to have now. And his thought is noticed by the 4 heavenly kings, the 4 Lokapalas, the protectors of the 4 quarters, and they produce 4 superhuman bowls, made of stone, clean, not smelling. This is a very interesting attribute, not smelling bowls. And taking them, they appear in front of the Buddha. This is the scene here on the pillar of Sanchi. Again, un-iconic, no Buddha there, and I show you a better scene or relief. Oops. Here it is. I show you a scene with, now in the iconic period, a relief from Gandhara, and the 4 Lokapalas are standing left and right of the Buddha with the bowls in their hand. So they offer 4 bowls, and this, predictably, brings the next predicament for the Buddha. What should he do? He reflects that if he took the bowl of one of them, the other 3 would be very unhappy. And the same if he took 2 bowls or 3 bowls. So there's only one way out, to magically bring together all the 4 bowls, to conflate them or bring them together into, make one bowl, transform them magically into one. And this he does, and so he's finally able to accept the offerings of the 2 merchants into the bowl. And after accepting that, he talks to them and tells them to take refuge in him, in the Buddha, in his teaching, the Dharma, and, very interesting again, in the community, the Sangha, which the text informs us has yet to be established. No Sangha at that time. The merchants do so, and by this they become the first 2 lay followers of the Buddha. And the Buddhist tradition unanimously tells us that the first all traditions agree on that point. The first two supporters and the first two lay followers of the recently awakened Buddha were two merchants. And this is surely not by chance. This is not something that just happened. And basically, I've made my point. To give another example of the prominent position of merchants in the biography of the Buddha. And I could leave it at that. But as I said before, I think there is more to the story. I'm sure that a listener or spectator who saw such a scene 2,000 years ago would have received another underlying message. And a message most modern readers or spectators are likely to miss, I think. Why? The question is, why is it the four heavenly kings who notice the need of the Buddha and take measures to fulfill it? The god Brahma or the god Indra would have been equally well qualified to do that, and in the hierarchy of the gods, they are much higher up. So if it was a question of hierarchy, it would have been Indra or Brahma to do this. Moreover, I don't think that the purpose of the main purpose of this story is to show the magical or supernatural powers of the Buddha, so to create one bowl out of four. This is just a byproduct, I would think. But there's a very close connection between the four Lokapalas and those merchants who are engaged in long-distance trade. To ensure the benevolence of the four heavenly kings and their respective retinues is one of the main necessities for a trader before he sets out on his travel. These kings, they are connected with the four directions, the four quarters, and therefore they are able to harm, but also to protect those who take a trip. Nowadays, everybody of us would contract all sorts of insurances for such a purpose. In previous times, a traveler was confined to solicit safety and reassurance from other powers. We will come back to that. The importance of the four heavenly kings becomes visible when we take another look at the stupa of Barhut, where we find major figures of them. So there were sponsors to have these figures created at the stupa. This is an image, or various images, of the heavenly king responsible for the northern direction. The inscription here says, so we wouldn't recognize it from the iconography. They don't have an iconography at that time. Yeah? But we recognize it, thank God, because the people at that time produced an inscription. Probably not everybody coming there recognized it as well. This could be one of the reasons. So it says Kubera Yaka, the Yaksha. This is the category of non-human beings named Kubera, also known, or maybe better known as Vaishravana, the Lokapala, the guardian of the north. The inscription above says it's the pillar is a donation by a monk, Venerable Buddha Rakshita. So these Lokapalas are important enough to be shown at the pillars, and it's at the northern gate of the stupa, so quite fitting or corresponding with the quarter Kubera belongs to. Now, the question is, why to do this? Why to have an image of Kubera there? Why would it make sense for a Buddhist to plead for protection with the four heavenly kings? Or, to put the question a different way, how is it possible for a Buddhist to think that they could, the four protectors could be more benevolent to him than to a non-Buddhist? Why should they react differently to him? This brings us to two quite important discourses, canonical discourses in the so-called long collection. I don't want to say too much about that, but they just a brief description, because they are, in various regards, they are extremely interesting. These discourses, first of all, they do not contain any religious message at all. No teaching in the sense of an instruction on the Buddhist path or on the factors of that make up our life or so. Nothing of that kind. The two texts are the Atanata Sutra. Atanata is the name of a mythic town, mythic town. And the second is the Mahasamaja Sutra, the Sutra of the Great Assembly. This Mahasamaja Sutra consists of the description of a huge number of non-human beings, especially of the followers of the four great kings. And they visit the Buddha, they come to the Buddha. The text is devoted to demonstrating that the Buddha, unlike others, is able to see all those beings. Normal people don't see them. Buddha sees them, he knows them, and again, I think important, he is able to name them. He knows the name of everyone of those 100,000 of beings standing in front of him. And they have come to pay homage to him. What is expressed here is, in a way, a relationship between powers. This is not at all a homily. The Buddha does not teach those deities. And the contents of the second sutra, the Atanata Sutra, they are basically the same. It focuses on Vaishravana Kubera, whom we see here, who comes to visit the Buddha and lists the retinue of the non-human beings of the four great kings. He describes their respective retinues. Vaishravana promises, and this is probably the main point of the text, Vaishravana promises that those beings will protect the followers of the Buddha against attacks from all other beings. The message is twofold. First, acknowledgement of the superiority of the Buddha by non-human agencies. And second, the promise of protection, very important. It is no wonder that this discourse gained great popularity in various, practically all Buddhist traditions, and that it was and still is used by Buddhists for protective purposes, for instance, in the Paritta tradition in Theravada Buddhism. And it is no wonder that henceforth the four great kings are practically omnipresent in Buddhism. Question: who recognizes this picture, or rather, question to the Stanford people, who does not recognize it? This is a very nice print. It's a print in the room of Irene, and it shows. If I understand the scene correctly, it's the left and right at the left and right sides, each two of the four Lokapalas. I don't know the scene. I'm not well versed with the iconography in Chinese. This seems to me to be Kubera or Vaishravana, but I'm not sure. This is without any guarantee. But the point, the Lokapalas are present even in Stanford. Now, when two merchants were the first to support the Buddha, and when they were joined in their endeavor by the four protectors, this surely sent a strong message to followers and non-Buddhists alike. The least one could say is that from the very beginning, Buddhism and commerce were on good terms with each other. And I do not, this sounds a little bit like irony or sounds sarcastic. I don't mean that at all, not at all. quite the opposite. Both were very much in need of support. The new religion and a profession like that of the merchants, the traders. And it seems that there was a mutual interest and a possibility of mutually benefiting each other that was that contributed a lot to the extremely fast growth of Buddhism during its first 2-3 centuries in India. And the more I think about it, the pace of this growth is stunning. It's a huge area and very fast. You find traces of Buddhism practically everywhere. Incredibly fast. So there must be reasons for that. And sometimes I think that we philologists tend to miss phenomena that are not, or at least not so well documented in the texts we study. And one of these phenomena is trade. Long-distance trade must have been intense before and during the first centuries of the Common Era. And this is the time when the Silk Road connects the capital of the Roman Empire in the west with the capital of the Chinese Empire in the east, Rome and Chang'an, two superpowers of that time. This means an endlessly long distance, and even this map does not show the whole distance. It goes, at least it goes up to the Mediterranean, and it covers the area which is more important for us. And this map focuses on the land route, but in terms of trade, the sea routes were by no means less important, probably even more important. And such a map tells us something about roads, tells us something about connections. And to underline this, I show you a very modern way of playing with these things. This is a map based on a Landsat image. It was kindly put at my disposal by a Danish scholar, Kasper Grönland Evers, who's very much interested in ancient in trade routes and trade between the European ancient world and Asia. A lot could be said about it. We filled it with stickers. He connected the places. So I don't want to go in detail. This would take quite a lot of time. It's only to impress you a little bit how immense, how intense, how many connections there are. All the red stickers are settlements connected with trade, and what he did was connecting these places, showing the routes, showing how densely they are distributed along certain routes. And this, the good thing, it also shows the trade routes on the sea. And all the information assembled in this image is based on archaeology, epigraphy, or written documents, other written documents. Please note this island here, east of the Horn of Africa. We will come back to that. First, however, I would like to continue with an interesting quote from a literary source that tells us something about the intensity. Such images, they tell us something about routes, yeah? But they tell us nothing if there is if a caravan, every second year a caravan is passing along the route, or if there's, like here on the 101 traffic, the density of the traffic. We learn nothing from that, but there is one very interesting indication. In India, plenty of Roman gold and silver coins have been excavated. Just one example of a silver and one example of a gold coin. And they attest to an intense traffic. And we even know that the trade with India caused some kind of an economic crisis at the beginning of the Common Era during the time of the first emperors. Due to the economic crisis, due to the enormous drain of gold and silver coins towards the east, especially towards India. Pliny, you know, this well-known historiographer, Latin historiographer in the 1st century of the Common Era, he complains, and I quote, "In no year, India draws less than 50 million sesterces from the wealth of our empire, and for this amount supplies goods to us that are 100 times more expensive than the producer price." Sounds somewhat familiar, such sentences, at least in this area of the world. And on the other hand, I see Germans, Chinese, and so, like the Indians. So Pliny was clearly unhappy, even if he exaggerated, which he probably does, not quite clear. The most important trade goods from India to the West were spices, but they leave hardly any archaeological traces, so I can't show you anything. But to show you something, there's a very nice example, I think. A statue found in Italy, and this is clearly an Indian product. A luxury good, a piece of art. This is a statue of ivory. It's damaged, but it's unquestionably a product from India. It's a female figure, of course, and it reproduces a specific type of representation. The Indian expression, Sanskrit expression is Shalabanjika for that. A type which is found in Indian art since the 3rd or 2nd century before the Common Era, mostly as a decorative element. I show you another photograph of the same statue to give you a somewhat better impression. And please note the specific posture of the body. The crossed legs is important. One arm, usually the right arm raised and grabbing something. I show you another example, a complete example for a comparison. This is the same time. It's also ivory, but it's also from India, but it was found in Afghanistan. And it's this figure which gives you an impression. All of you who have seen ancient scenes of the birth of the Buddha, this is very similar to the typical posture of the mother of the Buddha. There's a lot could be said about that, but this would distract us from the merchants, so I go on with trade. There is this left statue. Where was it found? It was excavated in Pompeii, in the Casa della Statuetta Indiana, in the house of the Indian statue. And this gives us a clear date. Yeah? So Pompeii was destroyed by the eruption of the Vesuvius in 79. And so the statue must have been brought there before this time. So the trade as such is established in both directions. But is there any evidence that Buddhists were participating in it? And I think there is, in fact, both literary and archaeological. And I will give one example for archaeology and one or two examples for literary sources. The example for archaeology is quite recent. A few years ago, scholars began to study a huge cave on the island of Socotra. And you remember I said, please take a note, the island of Socotra, east of the Horn of Africa. On this island, there's a huge cave here in this place. And the walls of this cave are partly covered with graffiti. And most of these graffiti were left by Indians, traders, sailors, travelers. The graffiti revealed that some of them were clearly Buddhist or had clearly to do something with Buddhism. And this, of course, is very solid evidence. One example will have to do, and I take all the images from a book by Ingo Strauch, sitting here on the inscriptions in Socotra, extremely useful contribution that made us aware of this, of the trait and also of the intensity. One example will have to do, since most of you will not be able to read either the original or the lower part where the lines are redrawn, I give you a transliteration. Bhagavato Mahamunisa Bhattigo Bhutto Rahavaso, the son of Bhattigo, for probably the Blessed One, the Mahamuni. So it's hard, or it's difficult not to think that this refers to the Buddha, Bhagavato Mahamuni. And I think it's a clear indication of a person somehow connected with Buddhism who left this graffiti. Now, that much for archaeology. Where in Buddhist literature do we find something about traveling merchants? And a major source are, of course, the Jatakas, the stories about former lives of the Buddha. And I take one example from the Pali, the Supadaka Jataka. The story is located in the town of Bharukacha, an important seaport here. And the story goes as follows. There was a trader community that equipped a ship, normal thing, often a part of the story. So people come together, traders come together, and they pay for equipping a ship. And as their captain, they hired the Bodhisattva, the future Buddha, and he acquired enormous wealth during the journey, faced many difficulties on the ocean, but finally brought the ship safely home to Bharukacha. Why do I choose this Jataka? The name of Bharukacha is also found in the Socotra graffiti. So story and archaeology or epigraphy, they somehow support each other. They are related. And the Supadaka Jataka exemplifies the basic plot of many similar stories. The ocean is the source of fabulous riches. And immediately one thinks of Pliny's statement about the 100 times, about this extreme profit margin of the Indian traders. Fabulous riches to be gained on the ocean, but it's also an extremely dangerous place. Usually a group of merchants comes together, they set out for the ocean, and on the trip they face all sorts of problems, frightening dangers, and monsters and whatever. And not always do they come home again. They are clearly in need of all the protection they can find. Not all the trade expeditions described in the Jatakas take place by ship and on the ocean. The Supriya Jataka in the Divyavadana, this is a collection of Sanskrit stories. It contains a long description of an, again, extremely dangerous road with mountains and rivers. And Supriya, the hero of the story, he is the Sartavaha, the caravan, this is the Sanskrit term for the caravan leader. So he is the equivalent of the captain in the seafaring stories. And again, the suspense of the narrative of the story depends on the dangers they have to face along the way. But again, the dangers dangers in the story may reflect very real ones. And a very important feature in the stories is the fact that it is always the bodhisattva who is able to overcome the problems, to save the merchants, and to guarantee the acquisition of tremendous wealth. And one more point may be noteworthy. When merchants figure in such stories, they are connected with long-distance trade. It's always long-distance trade, either by ship or by land. And this is by no means limited to the literature of early Buddhism. Merchants also appear in Mahayana sutras. One example is a nice comparison in the Dashabhumika Sutra between the behavior of a Sartavaha, such a caravan leader, and a bodhisattva on the first step of his career, as it were, on the first of the 10 stages or bhumis. And another one, probably everyone knows it, is the well-known story in the Upaya Kaushalya Sutra, where the bodhisattva is the captain of a ship sailing on the great ocean, and aboard are the usual 500 merchants. Buddhist stories are not very inventive when it comes to such figures. It's 500 chariots, it's 500 merchants, and in every story it's 500 merchants. So they are on the ship, and aboard is also a robber. And he intends to kill the merchants and take their goods, and this is the basic plot. And the captain, the bodhisattva, is trying to solve it. Now, it will need more research, but at this point, I have the impression that that merchants figure less prominently in Mahayana sutras than they do in the literature of early Buddhism. As I said, this is just an impression, but it may be worth checking that. And if this impression is correct, it could reflect the declining importance of the long-distance trade, at least with the West, due to various factors, political and so on, and the declining importance of such merchants for the Buddhist community. And in that context, just a footnote, I think this also connects with the first indications of the decline of Buddhism in India that seems to begin around the same time when the long-distance trade, especially with the West, starts to decline. There are I think in a number of indications, at least in certain areas, that there could be a relation, but that needs, again, it needs much more research. I'm in a way indebted to this extremely interesting book of Giovanni Verardi on the hardships and downfall of Buddhism in India. But it's the one thing one learns from that book and from many other indication is that that the decline of Buddhism does not start with Islam, with the arrival of Islam in India. It's much earlier in certain areas. Now, this brings us to it brings me to the last part of my talk. I've tried to show that merchants appear at important points in the Buddhist narratives right from the beginning. I have hinted at the mutual benefits to be gained from this connection, and I've tried to demonstrate the importance of trade with archaeological examples and with literary evidence. And now it remains to ask if there are any indications of how Buddhism provided the merchants with what they needed most, with security and protection. And indeed, this question is not really difficult to answer. There are plenty. If one starts to look, there are plenty of specific texts, and they are spread out through the Buddhist world. I will select just one example to show the basic mechanisms, and I take the so-called Disha Sauvastika Gatha, the verses for the benediction of the directions. The Disha Sauvastika Gatha offer comfort to travelers who set out on a journey. They assure them that whatever the direction they go in, the deities assigned to that portion of the world will watch over them. The text can be characterized as particularly tailored for merchants, to make use of an expression coined by Peter Skilling. When the verses are transmitted within a narrative, it's verses, when they embedded in a narrative, the narrative always features the two paradigmatic traders, Balika and Chapusa, the first two followers. In one of its best-known versions, this collection, this Dishasavastika Gatha, consists of 49 verses, and this is somewhat too much to read them all to you, and there's a lot of repetition, so it would not be so interesting, but I will quote a few of them just as an illustration how this functions. And, verse 6, welfare at night, welfare during the day, and welfare at noon. May there always be welfare, and may no evil occur to you. Verse 7, may good fortune rest on your right shoulder, may good fortune rest on your left shoulder, may good fortune be well installed on all your limbs, like a garland. Prosperity to you, prosperity and good fortune to you, O merchants, may prosperity be yours. And after that, this is kind of an introduction, and then all the four quarters are dealt with, and the goddesses and figures important in these directions are named and addressed. Again, just an example, and I take as an example the north, because we have seen Kubera or Vaishavana. On verse 37, on whatever business you shall go towards the northern direction, may the constellations that stand in that direction protect you, even including the stars, the constellations. 42, their overlord is the king named Kubera, whom we have met. And this overlord of all the yakshas, his retinue, guards the direction together with the rakshasas, another category of non-human beings, dangerous ones. 43, let this one, Kubera, watch over you with regard to abundance and prosperity. Let the directions be secure for you, and may no evil occur to you. And having attained your aim, may you return, guarded by the yakshas and the rakshasas. And this is a kind of a refrain recurring many times, this last verse. And one of them preserves a nice variant I want to mention. This is verse 36. Again, basically the same. Let this one watch over you with regard to abundance and prosperity. Let the directions be secure for you, and may no evil occur to you. And having attained your aim, may you return well guarded with all your, and this is the variant, with all your profits. This is what a merchant, what a trader expects. The latest scholarly work on these verses took its starting point from a manuscript fragment found at Bamiyan. And this provides me with a chance to show a final two slides and connect them with a few concluding remarks. And I will not show the manuscript. Many people, having heard the introduction, know that I'm closely connected with manuscripts, but I won't show this one. It's not very spectacular, so I show something else that looks better. And this is Bamiyan itself. A very nice view of Bamiyan. Here, what is the spectacular thing about Bamiyan? This is, better we should say this was, the two huge Buddha statues. Here the yellow framing shows you the two niches where the Buddhas once stood. The larger one, the largest Buddha statues in the world, and the larger one in the metric system, something like 54 meters. This is 180 feet or something like that. It's incredible. So just imagine a Buddha of 180 feet standing here in the middle of Stanford. He would look far. And another thing is, it's not inexpensive to have something like this created. Image of this is the larger one of the two, as I said, 54 meters, 180 yards. And you saw the surrounding mountains. They are not it's not an inviting countryside, not an inviting landscape. They were surely dangerous and fighting enough to induce merchants to seek all the protection they could get. And as a token of their gratitude, to leave some of their profits in the places where the protection was provided. For instance, by monks who recited texts like the Disha Sarvastika Gata for their benefit. The manuscript fragment, this is interesting, is of a fairly small size. It's one could even say a pocketbook format. So it's small, pocketbook, and it's made of leather, which is unusual. And this two possible ways of understanding that. First, it may have been used by a monk who had to go around a lot. So leather is a very durable material, and it's easy to put it into somewhere and then move around. One possible explanation. Another explanation would be that it was worn on the body like an amulet. Then also you can't do that with a birch bark or palm leaf manuscript, but with leather it's no problem. In any case, its function, the function of this manuscript was apotropaic. It was protective, protecting the person, protecting the profits, both extremely important. And when we remember once again the reciprocal relation, connection between providing protection and generating support, this booklet was indirectly, in a way, protecting also Buddhism itself. Thank you very much. Anybody dares to volunteer a question? Should I
Yes, please.
do the... Oh, sorry. Yes, please.
Given the complexity of the Silk Road, I think we've all probably seen presentations on that. I mean, it's very dramatic. So some described it as the internet for 1,000 years back then, essentially, the Silk Road. And the value of art in trade. One has to ask the question, did the religion follow the art, or did the art follow the religion? In terms of the proliferation along the Silk Road. Was it, you know...
Along the Silk Road.
Yeah.
The amazing thing is, so in an earlier lecture, I used to come to talking about the Silk Road, extended talk about the Silk Road, some of those images being used, and coming to a point where I showed one of these modern maps, colorful maps on the spread of Buddhism, with these wonderful arrows going in the different directions. And there was a very strong arrow going up from northern India through Gandhara and following the Silk Road connection to India, which went through Gandhara, through Bamiyan. Yeah? So very thick arrow going up and reaching the Silk Road, the east-west axis, and then turning only to the east. And I raised the question. Before that, I had tried to build up the understanding that Buddhism would have been much more fitting for the West than for the Chinese. It was a strange thing to reach China, especially the art. All these naked Indians, these naked women, you have seen them. Chinese did not, at that time, did not receive this. Sooner than not, these figures became dressed. Yeah? While in India, they stayed naked, yeah? At least the upper part. Yeah? So, and nakedness, nudity in art is no problem in Rome and Greece. Yeah? So these people they would have thought these Indian things, they are nothing special. They fit very well. So art did not go to the West. Trade went to the West. Art did not go, did not follow. And apparently, ideology did not go to the West, only to the East. So this, coming back to this map with these arrows, this was simply too good not to use it. The big arrow, I have to show it in your direction, the big arrow going along the Silk Road to the East, and nothing. Just a very tiny thing going to West. This is a little bit more Merv, is the now a big city. This is the place where we have where Buddhist documents were found when something in the 60s, end of the 60s, there was a hill excavated, probably a stupa. This was not well documented, but they found a manuscript, very interesting manuscript, which was then that was the Soviet Union, so it was brought to St. Petersburg. That is, for me, I've seen a figure found in Persia, in the Iran, a Buddha figure, but it was not clear where it really came from. The excavation connects with the place. So this is for me, Merv is for me the place furthest to the west. But as I said, no art. This this is misleading. I had to show you something to document the trade to the West. As I said, spices, you can't document spices, but this piece, this was just a curio thing. Yeah? Nothing else. We have it's also worth mentioning, in Sweden, at an archaeological excavation, going back to the maybe 10th, 12th, 10th, 11th century, at a lake, a Buddha statue was found, metal. And style is not easy to date, but so something like 6th, 7th century. What does that mean? Buddhism in Europe and before the 10th century? That would be nice, but would make a good story, but this was just a curio piece. Again, trade brought it it was the time when the successors of the Vikings were trading towards the east. So it's easy to explain it. And I think this ivory piece, ivory was an important trade good from India to the West, not only from India, but also from India. And so this was, somebody took that along because it was nice and brought it for whatsoever purpose. I don't think that I should be careful because I didn't really do any research on that. If the place in the villa in Pompeii where it was found, if this would tell us something, but as far as I know, it does not. John.
What do we know about the relationship between traveling merchants and traveling monks? So,
yeah, this is, this is a couple of days ago, I read my abstract, I saw my title, and as it usually happens, I remember the first words of Lothar Lederrose in his talk. Months, ages ago, you give a title, you give an abstract, and then you are caught with it. And my title was Monks and Merchants, so there's not much about monks. And I find it, somehow the two must have gone together, at least towards the east. But I know Ingo is raising his hand. I know very little about it. So I don't dare to comment on that. If they went in teams or how that worked, I don't know.
That was also for one of our markets. Yeah, but if you compare, for instance, the corpus of inscriptions from the Gilbert Valley, and there are monks.
Yeah, but if I understood, exactly, if I understood John correctly, he was asking what was the connection between the two.
I was also thinking spread of Buddhism and the meaning of merchants and the role of merchants and all this. And I would say, I mean, of course, it was useful for Buddhism to have the support by the merchants, but I don't think that it's enough to have just a commercial movement into one direction, even if some of the participants were lay Buddhist people, like the person you showed from Sokotra. I think that the most important condition is the participation of monastic staff, you can say, to spread the Buddhism, to localize the Buddhism, to speak with what Jason Neal has found out for this Karakorum highway, to localize that and to make it really a religion supported also by the local elites, by the
ruling
economic and ruling elites of that region. That was one condition you don't find in the movement to the west, at least if you take the sources. So there was in the corpus of Sokotra more than 200 inscriptions, but there was not a single person
which could
identify
that you could identify. There may have been monks, but they were not identifiable.
They would have mentioned that.
Probably, yeah, probably. I think.
You don't find along the whole western route not a single trace of institutionalized Buddhism. So there is not a single stupa or something like that.
No, that's right.
Buddhist,
yeah.
Monastery or something.
Yeah. So my starting point. Well, there were various starting. These are questions I'm thinking about since quite some time. So we look at stupas like Sanchi. This must have been an extremely expensive undertaking at that time in India to have such a stupa built and all these stone carvings done. So this was not done in one moment. This went on for ages, and it's interesting when it stops, that it does not go on for a very long time after in the Common Era. This is one of my one of the reasons why I think that the support changes, the support situation changes. So these must have been extremely expensive places to construct. And now we have these two well-known stupas of Bharhut and Sanchi. And during the last few decades, a number of other such places have surfaced by excavations. And there's one colleague who is now traveling a lot in India to find those places. Extremely, for me, again, extremely interesting. Stupas seem to be landmarks, often not in the middle of a settlement, but outside. So possibly at crossroads, yeah? And in places where you don't have städtisch, you don't have a town nearby that would support the place. So this made me wonder. I asked colleagues in classical archaeology, do we know how much a Roman temple, how much it costs? Just to get ideas. If it is possible to calculate, we have no figures at all from ancient India, how long it took a sculptor to carve something, how much he had to be paid. We know nothing. And but it would be interesting to relate it, to see figures from better documented areas and see what it means, how much surplus money there must be available to have things like that created. Another, which for me as a European, as a German, another thing which immediately pops into mind are the medieval cathedrals. So how was the financing arranged? Because they're extremely expensive. And was it a local community? Was it farmers? Last week, one weekend before, I discussed this with Gregory Chopin, who was who decidedly preferred, in the beginning of our talk, decidedly preferred farming communities as the supporters of these creators and supporters of these stupas. And in the end, then we had an extended discussion on that, and in the end, he was, we agreed that both may have been very important, because I confronted him with Bamyan, with a place like Bamyan. You don't have any farmlands. Around the stupas, these huge stupas, the farmland may have belonged to Buddhist monasteries and was rented, given out, and so these farmers were in a way Buddhist laborers of the monasteries. That may be possible, and that was the idea, the basic idea of Gregory Chopin, because he took inscriptions at the stupas as his starting point and said they were mostly local, from the local community. They pointed to a local community. That may be correct, but how to explain it in places where where it is impossible, like Bamyan, to draw enough money for there are fields in the valley, of course, but you could never, from these fields, never derive a profit big enough to create such big Buddha statues. So there must have been other reasons. And this was one of the main routes of one of the main trade routes. So this is how I tried to connect things. I mean, if you look at it, there are holes, endless number of holes. This needs much more. And as usual, in ancient India, history is not well documented. No figures. No, not even complaints like Pliny. Pliny complaining about this trade. It may be a total exaggeration, but still it points to something. And we have a document that tells us there was this trade. Nothing like that from India, except these stories I referred to.
I do not know much about this topic.
I don't either, so.
So I think I read that the main mode of trade in the Silk Road was a section of short distance trade. So it's more than
Yes. Yes. Yes.
trade with our way. They just go to the town next to them. And we just continue to start. And this problematizes this. So in order for merchants to have contributed to the spread of Buddhism, they must have come from a place where Buddhism is its way.
Apparently, a lot of it was not like an Indian caravan starting somewhere in Varanasi, Benares, and then after 2 years or so reaching Chang'an or so. Evidently not. But on the way to the east, there seem to have existed networks of traders who passed it on from one point to the next. So possibly related communities. Even if one person did not go very far, he passed it on to someone who was connected with it. And again, I discussed exactly this point with one colleague in classical studies in Munich, who said that one explanation why Buddhism didn't go to the West may have been the difference in the organization of the trade, that it was different persons and different organizations, institutions with short-term transport. So there was nothing going beyond, except the goods, beyond the next point of exchange. That was one of the, I don't claim that this is the explanation.
We know that there were Indian colonies, and that's not true.
On the sea route. I'm talking about the land route.
Yeah, but on the sea route we have evidence
Of course.
in Egypt,
Of course.
of Indians there.
Yes, of course. That's true, at least that far. Yeah? stupid thing that is that big pharaoh heads are excavated at the moment in Cairo, but no Buddhist statues. No documents on no traces on the ground at all. And again, at least we know, the point is we know a little bit more about how the trade was organized on the Western side, Roman side. Because there we have documents, and he said that this, he would expect this to be the needle's eye where the ideology did not pass through. My colleague.
I just add that
Yeah.
I talk to you all the time, so I shouldn't say anything.
No,
because
please.
my office is next door.
It's the
But
chance.
Isn't that really a dangerous
No, not long anymore, John.
Isn't that really a dangerous line of reasoning, though, to start asking the question of why didn't Buddhism go to Rome? It's one of these negative questions when the more interesting question is why did it go elsewhere? And that's something you can demonstrate. It's like this question of why didn't capitalism arise in China? Why didn't science arise wherever? There's an endless number of possibilities, but really the more interesting question is why did it go the other direction?
Not a counter argument, but we are inclined to do research on success, not on failure. But I think failure is also something interesting. Why did something fail to grow? So as I said, and the more I think about it, especially the first 2 centuries of Buddhism, this is a tremendous success story. Unbelievable, because now we have the internet, so something interesting is around the world in a second. But at that time, there were long distances, different languages all the time. A different dialect things had to be changed to a different dialect. So this speed is breathtaking to me, and so I thought about such things, and then it was this map which inspired me to ask the question: why is this a one-way success? Of course. The point, you're right, there's endless possibilities of speculation to explain failure. And it's, of course, impossible to verify them. You can speculate, but you cannot prove them. And it's equally difficult to, in the case of Buddhism, to speculate about the success. Why did it make the way to China at that time, and what were the supporting factors? But it's, of course, there's more material you can think about.
Maybe I think, I mean, since most virtues, of course, it stresses the economic aspect, and that's also what Benjamin Schoffen does not.
In a way, this is why I talked to him.
Especially in the case of Buddhism, it might be equally interesting to look at political dimensions. And so
Of course, of course.
Also, I mean, that of course you can say that merchants are very important, but I think that equally important are the political elites. And I mean, that's
I think yeah.
Discourses, and also if you look at the spread, I mean, also along the eastern route, if you look at places like Gilgit or Swat Valley, I mean, these were royal, royal people who supported Buddhism and paid a lot of money to have these things erected. Of
Absolutely.
course, also for political reasons. And Buddhism was strong in India when there were dynasties with an international orientation, like the Kushanas.
Kushanas is the best example, yeah.
Way. I mean,
Yeah.
unifying India was also, in a certain sense, at least a huge endeavor, and Buddhism was much, in fact, needed to make that possible, and especially under the Kushans. And then the decline of Buddhism was mainly with this restriction, as we had it under the Gupta dynasty, towards India itself. And then we have Buddhism only in pockets where it still was supported by
local
dynasties, like the
yes.
Palas in the east. I mean, and of course, commerce was always there. It was also there under the Kushans.
Yeah.
But Nonetheless, the political ideas behind these dynasties were different and not so much in line with Buddhist, also internationalism and
Of course, I think this is an important point that after the Kushanas becomes difficult because the international connections cut off and the ideology, state ideology changes. Of course, this is, please do not leave this room with the idea that merchants explain everything. This was just one factor that seems to play an important role. It seems to play an important role in the narratives, in the biography of the Buddha from the very beginning. So this is interesting. And again, one of my questions was, what do they profit? What do merchants, why should they be interested in Buddhism? And then this, I think, I tried to explain in a, at least in a myself convincing way. And so mutual benefit, this is extremely interesting. I mean, this is also interesting with regard to rulers. Again, it may tell a lot about my own biography. My own contact with Buddhism was with the teaching, the sublime, wonderful teaching of the Buddha. Yeah? That was my first contact. And so, of course, this was so convincing. But over the years, I think, and having watched Buddhist centers and centers of other religions come and go, I started to speculate or think about reasons. What is necessary? And I find I'm still, this is a totally, not totally different, it's another topic, it's a related topic, but what concerned me a lot was the question of how to stabilize Buddhism as a factor in the West, how to bring it to the West, and how to what is necessary to stabilize it, which factors, which people, who has to be benefited, to change it from something more fashionable at the moment, so which is fashionable at one moment and gone in the next moment. How to something like you're also concerned with, stabilize it, preserve it, bring it to areas like Italy, where it is not one of the major religions so far, but show it to the people and establish it there. And so this was another point of departure of my thoughts. What is necessary? And money is extremely necessary. I saw this in many centers in my surrounding, that only those were financially, strong supporter was securing the situation. Things worked. This is so interesting. We can watch, again, you can compare that with the beginning of Buddhism. What is necessary that a teaching of some, you could say, strange people who leave the society and have their own ideas what to do with life? Why does it become interesting for others to adopt it, to follow it, and so, and to support it? There are many relations between modern developments, which, as I said before, we have practically no historical information about the time of the Buddha. So what we can do is watch modern day developments and reflect on how this could contribute to our understanding of much earlier processes, developments, and so on. No urgent hands.
As for Buddhism, so for Buddhist studies, one needs support. Comparisons are invidious. Before we thank Professor Hartmann for his excellent lecture, I just want to say a few words. Comparisons are, as is well known, invidious. But we all know with some guests, they quickly wear out their welcome. The overstayers, a sad category in this day and age. And there are people who, when it's time to go, well, it's time to go. And there are those that you don't want to see depart. And since Uwe is returning to Germany on Monday, I'm happy to say that he's definitely in the third category. We shall miss him, not only for the teaching that he's given our students, and I think more than that, as a role model, and that's really what the visiting professor is all about. When the scheme is working, you should see what the possibilities of scholarship are, not only in scholarly terms but also in personal terms. So I'm sure you'll be missed by our students and by our faculty. You'll be much inspired by your presence, and even by our staff, and that's not always the case. The first thing that one should do is actually notice that they exist, right? That doesn't always happen, I'm sorry to say, but it has this time. So we've enjoyed very much having you here. So may we end by thanking you not just for the lecture, but for your 3 months with us.
Thank you.